All right. Well, welcome everyone to another Tableau Tuesday. Today's session is about advanced visualizations. And to start, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about myself first. My name is Santiago Sanchez. I'm a solution engineer at Tableau. And what you can see in the picture there is my wife and I in a particular, a very special place to me. I don't know if maybe you know. I'll give you a quick hint about it. Uh, we are sitting, each of us, in a different hemisphere in the world. Just another hint, she's on the northern hemisphere and I'm on the southern hemisphere. And you may have guessed it, that is Ecuador. And yeah, that's right. So I am originally from Quito, Ecuador. That's what I picked that picture. And although today I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, I started in Ecuador, then I went to college in Mexico, then I moved to Seattle where I joined Tableau, and now I'm down in California. So it feels like a little bit of a boomerang, my life, but which is nice. And today I am sharing a little bit of Tableau with you, which is amazing. Um, I am for today. I thought we'd start with a little bit of a quick trivia for those trivia fans out there, or just a fun fact if you like fun facts. So if I were to ask you, what is the highest mountain in the world? What would be the answer? You may have thought about Mount Everest, and you'd be right. Mount Everest is the highest, has the highest altitudes in the world when measured from sea level. However, because Earth's shape is not a perfect sphere, it's actually a little bit wider than the center of the Earth, than the equator. When you measure mountains from the middle of the world, from the center of the Earth, actually the highest mountain in the world happens to be in Ecuador. It's Mount Chimborazo. And Mount Chimborazo looks like this. Mount Chimborazo is the highest when measured from the center of the world. And another fun fact about Mount Chimborazo is that it also happens to be the closest, if you climb to the top, it happens to be the closest point from Earth into space. And these days we spend a lot of time at home and inside, and so thinking about being in outer space sometimes feels good. So there's two fun facts for you. Mount Chimborazo, highest mountain in the world we measure from the center of the Earth, and it happens to be in Ecuador. So with that, that's a little bit about me, but really today is about advanced visualizations. And start with a little bit of an introduction. We'll talk a little bit about Show Me in case you haven't used it, uh, so you can see how we can build a viz in no time. But if you've used Show Me in the past, you may know that not all the visualizations that you can build in Tableau are available there. So what happens when something is not in Show Me? Well, for that, that's where we'll spend most of our time today. We'll be talking about how to create other types of charts so you can learn some concepts that you can then take to build maybe even more visualizations. Today, we'll focus on these visualizations. We'll build bars within bars. We'll build a waterfall chart, a couple of them. We'll build a couple of Pareto charts. We'll build a Sparklines, a bomb chart, and we'll wrap it up with a Trellis chart. Now, if you like everything that we've seen today, we're also going to, I'll point you to a couple of resources towards the end so you can see, you can learn more and you can see how you can really build anything you want using the concepts that we learned today. So that's the agenda. Now, let's, as with anything Tableau, let's go and jump into it and let's build something. So So here we are with our Tableau workbook. And this is what we're going to use we'll go through each one of these story points to start building and learning how we can build these other visualizations. But as I mentioned, before we jump into this advanced visualization, let's do a little bit of an introduction into Show Me. If you're new to Tableau or if you're starting to use Tableau, you may have noticed that when you drag and drop something, you don't necessarily need to specify a type of chart. For example, if we're looking at, I don't know, let's say sales by products of category, we can see something like this, and we can see immediately the results for each one of our subcategories. But we don't need to specify that we wanted to see it in a bar chart. Or, for example, maybe we want to see again some of sales but then we want to see it by date. And now suddenly we get a line chart instead, right? Or maybe we want to see this in something geographic like a state. We can double click on it, we can double click on profit, and we never really have to specify again what type of chart. Tableau suggests a type of chart, a map in this case, because it looks at the data that we're trying to analyze and it gives us a suggestion, in this case, a map. That is key in Tableau. Tableau allows you to focus on the questions that you have. It helps you have a conversation with your data without making you think about the type of chart that you may or may not want to use. So you focus on what matters. And in this case, we are seeing the results by map. But what happens if Tableau suggests me something that I wasn't quite expecting? Like maybe I wanted to see this as a table, or maybe I wanted to see this as a bar chart or something else. Well, on the top right of your Tableau desktop, you will see Show Me. And Show Me has some of the most common visualizations that we have available. So if you want to explore this information as a table, you can click on a table. Now, if you want to add some visual elements to it, like color, maybe we choose a highlight table. What if you want to see this in something more visual, maybe as a bar chart or as a bubble chart? You can start changing the lenses in how you see your data immediately. You don't need to pick new types of charts, move fields from one place to another. You just pick the type of visualization that you want to use, and you select it. So Show Me is super helpful in giving you different perspectives into your data. And all you need to do is open it up and change the perspective. So maybe we leave this as a map. But again, what happens if there are some views here that some other types of visualization that we want to use that are not in Show Me? For example, I cannot see here a waterfall chart, or what I was going to show you first, a bars within bars type of chart, or a Pareto chart. So that's when we need to then start to use other elements in Tableau Desktop to help us build those visualizations. So with that, let's go into advanced visualizations. And we're going to start with a little bit of a warm-up. We're going to start with this type of chart, bars within bars. And this is really helpful when you want to compare two different measures. For example, when you want to compare an actual versus a goal. So you want to know how far or close you are from your target. So here what we can see, for example, is we want to see these are our actual sales in green, and we're comparing those with our planned sales. So with this, what we're going to do is we're going to be able to see how far or close are we from our target. Another way to see this, you may have seen before, is a bullet chart. It's similar to that. So let's build it. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to start with our let's say our sales, right? That's going to be, we have two types of sales, actuals and budget sales, so targets. So let's grab one of them first, and we have a bar, but now we're gonna break this by the different categories that we have of products in this case. So we can see we can see what our goals are, but we also need to see the actuals. So let's go ahead and add actuals next to it. Now, as we do this, notice that we have two different axes. We have one for our plans or budgets, and we have one for our actuals. But we want to see them one on top of the other. So one thing we can do over here is we can combine those two charts by using a dual axis. If you click on one of these measures, like our actual sales in this case, you can select dual axis. And when you do that, what's going to happen is now we are putting both of them together. So we can already start to see that we have some budget sales and some actual sales over here for each one of our categories. We can start comparing them. But if you notice, the scale between these two axes is very different. We have budget sales that goes all the way up to 1.3 million. We have actual sales. We haven't gotten to our goals yet. So we are on up to 650K. In order to really compare these two and make a real apples to apples comparison, we want to synchronize these axes. We want to have the same scales. And the way we do that is we can right click on this axis and we can synchronize them. So when we do that, notice that both go to the same axis, and we can now see that we're still quite a bit away from our goal. We will get there, but not there yet. Now, this is not a bar, right? We haven't built a bar yet. Now, if you notice on the left-hand side, we now have in the marks area, we have an area for our budget cells, and we have an area for our actual cells. And each one of them has all the visual elements that you are already familiar with, like color, size, label, etc. More importantly, they also have a way that allows you to change the type of chart. Again, Tableau will suggest you one like automatic, but you can always change it. For example, in this case, we want to use a bar. So let's go ahead and select the bar. And we've just turned our budgeted cells into a bar. Um, Actually, I kind of like this. I may want to leave it this way, depending on the type of analysis I'm trying to do. But because we want to see our bars within bars, we're going to go ahead and change that for the actual cells as well. So we'll click on actual cells and we change this to a bar too. So now we have our budgeted cells in gray and our actual cells in green. The last thing we need to do, because sometimes there will be a time where our actual sales go above our budgeted sales. And when that happens, we don't want to just cover the bar. We still want to have some perspective about it. So what we can do is we can change the size of one of these bars. In particular, let's do it with the actual sales. Let's just make it a little bit thinner. So when we do that, we can now see that in green, we have our actual sales, and in gray, we have our budgeted sales or our targets. And we can see that we still are far away from it. But once we get there, we'll still have a perspective of how much further we are from our goal, which will be great news at that time. So with bars within bars, we can see that we can compare those two measures. And really, there's two important concepts to this. Number one, we're using dual axis. So we can compare two measures by putting them side by side in a dual axis. And when we did that, one key thing we did was to synchronize the axis because we needed both of them to be on the same scale. And the second one, just because we don't want to lose perspective on whether we have gone above the goal or not, we don't want to cover the whole bar, we change the size of one of these bars. We make it a slightly thinner so we can see that even when we go above our goals. And so that's a little bit about bars within bars. If you have used a bullet chart, this is another way to do something very similar. All right. So that was the warm up. Let's go a little bit further. The next one is a finance favorite. Uh, a waterfall chart is a type of visualization that helps us see how each one of our business units or product categories are contributing to the grand total. And it helps us compare specifically two different points in time normally, like last quarter with this quarter or last year with this year. And so it goes from zero all the way on the left to the grand total on the right. And along the way, we can see how each one of our business units, product lines are contributing to that grand total. So what we want to do is build this. And in order to do this, let's go ahead and uh, create, first off, we need to create that bar chart. We need to see the contributions of each one of our, in this case, product categories. So what we're going to use now is profit. So let's drag profit into rows. We can see the results over here. These are the overall results. But we want to break this by, let's say, products of category, like a product line. Now, we can see that um, some product lines are contributing positively to this result, but some are doing it negatively. So this is already helpful, but a waterfall chart really starts in zero and ends in the grand total. So the first thing we need to do is add that grand total. Let's go ahead and do that by going to the analytics panel on the left-hand side of the screen, and let's add a total. So adding a total, we just grab it from left to right and drop it into row grand totals. So now we have the grand total. So we're starting to get the components in the screen already. We already have the profits by each subcategory. We already have the grand total. But the thing about waterfall charts is they don't show us the results of each one of the subcategory individually. They help us see a cumulative effect from left to right. So we want to do a grand total, a running total instead. And in order to do this, we're going to use type of formulas or type of functions in Tableau that are called table calculations. Table calculations are super helpful when you want to do a secondary calculation based on what you already have on the screen. Let me give you an example. We already have profits here. That we can see the profits by subcategory, but we don't need to see that. We need to change that a little bit. We need to see the running total of those profits. So we need to do a secondary calculation on top of profits. And in order to do that, we can click on the measure that we're interested on, in this case, profit, and we're going to use a quick table calculation for running total. This is going to start counting from left to right cumulatively. And if we do that, we can now see that we start in appliances over here, and then we end up all the way in the grand total. So that it's almost there, but a waterfall chart doesn't show like that. It's not represented like this. A waterfall chart starts from the top and then goes down the bottom, from the bottom to the top, as a bar chart does. So what we want to do is we want to use this marks area again. And instead of using a bar chart, which is what is suggested, we're going to use a Gantt bar. When we use a Gantt bar, what we are marking now is the end of the bar. We're showing the top. And now, in order to create the effect of a waterfall, what we need to do is we need to give each one of these slices a size. And what this size is going to be, it's going to be, it has to be relative to the profit, but the profits are generally positive, so they generally go from towards the top. We don't want this in a waterfall chart. We want to go the other direction. We want them to go from top to bottom. So we're going to create a calculation on the left, over here, we can enrich our data set creating a calculated field. And let's call this negative profit. This one is going to be relatively simple. All we need to do is we need to change the sign of the profit. So we're going to type minus, and we're going to do profit. So just so you can see that, all it's going to do is change the sign of the profit. It's going to make it negative. As we can see, this is valid. But with this, what we can do now is we can just get to size. And notice that now we see whenever a category is contributing positively to the outcome or when one is contributing negatively to the outcome. Now, to make this even more obvious, what we can do is we can use color. So we can really highlight when something is being super successful for us and when something is not. And to do this, we can grab profit, drop it into color, and you can now see that there are some that are clearly contributing to our results, to our profits, but some that are in trouble, like tables. So with a waterfall chart, what we can do is we can see that contribution from left to right all the way to the grand total. Now, there's sometimes a slightly modification of this waterfall chart that we want to see. We're seeing this across all the different products or all the different BUs that we may have. But sometimes we want to see the contribution within, say, the product lines. These products of category may be part of a hierarchy, and we want to see contributions within that hierarchy. So let me duplicate this. Let's click. We can duplicate any of the sheets by right-clicking on the name and duplicate them. And let's look at product category. If you look at this, when we add product category, we have three different product categories: furniture, office supplies, and technology. And the waterfall chart still seems to work. That's okay. But what we want to do now is we don't want to see the results overall across all the product categories. We want to see a waterfall chart for each one of these product categories. We want to see sort of mini waterfall charts. So how do we do that? Well, there's two things missing. Number one, we're missing subtotals. We need subtotals for each one of the product categories. So that's easy. We can come into analytics. Again, we'll grab the totals and we'll drop subtotals. Now, that almost feels like it's working, but there's something odd still this chart, right? As we go from left to right, notice that the next category, I'm sorry, it starts where we left off. It starts on the subtotal from the previous. And so it seems like these are almost flying, right? We don't want that. We want them to restart each one of them from zero. So how do we change that? Well, one cool thing about table calculations, which if you remember is what we're using here to do the running total, is that with table calculations, you can configure them. You can specify how do they operate, in which direction and with which scope they operate. So one thing we can do, for example, is we can say, instead of computing this running total across the whole table from left to right, we want to do this for each of the panels, for each of the panes, in this case, the product category. So if we do that, if we change the scope of these table calculations to be for each panel or each product category in this case, what happens is notice that now we're restarting every product category. So we have these mini waterfall charts that allows us to see the contribution only within the category. So that's a little bit of a waterfall chart. A couple of key concepts again here. Number one, whenever you have information in the screen that you can use or that you need to slightly modify, you need to do a secondary calculation on top of it, but it's already on your screen, what you can do is you can use a table calculation. A table calculation allows you to transform that measure, in this case profit, into something else, like a running total, as opposed to the absolute measure it is. That's the first one. And the second one is with table calculations, you can specify a scope. Normally, the scope is the whole table, going from left to right, for example, but you can change that so that in this case, it resets every panel, every product category. This will be important because we'll continue to use table calculations in the following examples. But with this, we've actually already tackled two. We tackled a waterfall chart, and we also tackle a waterfall chart partition by category or a mini waterfall chart, like the ones that you're seeing on the screen here. All right, now the third one is a really common one. For anything that follows the 80-20 rule, the Pareto rule, is a lot of this is used in quality analysis. You want to see that information using a Pareto chart. In this case, for example, you may want to see if your top customers, let's say the 20% of your customers, are the ones that are generating most of the sales for you. Because if they are, you really want to focus on them and you want to make sure that they stay your customers for life. And so what we want to do here is we want to understand who are those top customers. And moreover, we may want to check if the 80-20 rule applies for these customers within our company, within our data set. So a Pareto chart in this case is a combination of two types of charts. It's a bar chart that you can see each customer here is a tiny bar that represents how much they are contributing to the sales, and the line chart, on the other hand, helps us see how much, what percentage are they on that of the total sales? Are they contributing, 1%, 10%, 15%, etc., so that we can see all the customers that are towards the left of that 80% of sales. So we can see we can see our bigger customers that way. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do two things. We're going to build a bar chart, and then we're going to build a line chart. Now, how do we combine two different types of charts? Remember, one of the key concepts that we learned about on the bars within bars, we can use a dual axis, right? So let's start with looking at sales. Let's look at sales. We have this bar, and we're going to break this time by customer name. We have many customers, so Tableau is going to tell us, are you sure you want to see all these customers? We're going to say yes for now. And one thing about Pareto charts is they start with our bigger customers first. So what we want to do is we want to sort this. Now we can see that Gordon is our top customer, followed by Glenn, Rosemary, etc., etc. But there's a pretty big scroll bar, right? So we want to fit this everything within the same window. And the way we do that is we can go ahead and fit the width within this visualization so that everything gets collapsed. And now we can see a different bar for every customer. So that's already the first the first visualization, the bar chart. But the second one was the running total. So how do we do that that line chart that was the running total? So what we can do is we can add another copy of cells. We'll drop it into rows. So we have these two axes over here. But the second one is not going to be cells. It has to be a percentage of the cells that each customer is contributing to. And so remember table calculations? We already have what we need on the screen. We have customer and we have sales, but feels like we need to do a slightly transformation. We don't want to see the absolute sales. We want to see the percentage of those. So what we can do here is we can, just like we did before, go into quick table calculation. And what we're going to do first is we're going to do a running total because we want to see how each one of them is contributing to the grand total. So let's do that first. Now that starts to seem more like that initial Pareto chart model that we started off, but this is showing us the absolute number. We need to see the percentage. So we're not quite there yet. Now the cool thing about table calculations is that you can also create one on top of the other. So let's go ahead and edit that table calculation, and we're going to do a secondary calculation. In this one, what we want to see on the secondary calculation is the percent of the total, so that we can see how each customer contributes all the way from 0 to about 100% over here. So as we change this, we now see that we have a bar chart, and that shows us the absolute sales of every customer. And below, we have another bar chart that shows us the percentage uh, of each customer sales compared to the grand total. Now, a Pareto chart was a bar chart and a line chart, so we need to change that, right? But you already learned how to do that. On the left-hand side, you can specify what type of chart you want to see, in this case, a line chart. And over here, we want to keep this as a bar chart. So we're almost there. What's missing? Well, we want to combine them, right? So like we did on the first exercise or warm up, let's click on cells and on one of these measures and dual access them. And now what you can see is that we have a Pareto chart that shows us on one hand the percentage and on the other hand the sales for every customer. How do we know what that 80% is though? Well, at this point, this is relatively easy. We go into analytics, we can add a line, a constant line into our chart, and we can say, hey, where is the 80%? Now that 80% happens to be right around Margaret. So anybody next to Margaret towards the left is contributing about 80% of our sales. So those are our top customers. If we want to run some kind of campaign, those will be the customers that we really want to focus on. So that is one way to build a Pareto chart. Now, we already get a list of our customers, but sometimes we need more than that. We want to see exactly where that 20% intersection is. And right now we cannot do that because we have names down the bottom, right? Like if you notice over here, each one of our bar charts represents a customer. It's a name. If we want to really match that 80-20%, what we want to do is we want to have two axes. We want to have an axis on the top, on the left, I'm sorry, for the percentage of sales, and we want to have an axis on the bottom for the percentage of customers. So how do we change our Pareto chart so that it looks more like this and a little bit less than this? Well, that's the next example. And the good thing is that what we already learned from this Pareto example, we can apply here. So let's go ahead and build this. We started with sales, right? So let's get sales here. We have sales, that's all great. We were seeing sales by customer. But if we drop customer into columns, we already know that we get this really long scroll bar and we start to see each one of the customers. And we don't want that. We want to see, instead of the customers, we want to see an axis. So how can we change this customer name into an axis? Well, we need to have some kind of measure. We need to have some kind of metric that allows us to count the number of customers. And we can do that by clicking on customer name that we have in columns and convert this into a measure. What we're going to do is we're going to do a count distinct. We're going to be counting how many customers do we have first, and then we're going to see, if those customers are contributing that to that 80% of our sales. So let's change it first to count distinct. And now we have two axes, one for sales and one for the count of customer names. So that is getting us closer, but this is nowhere close to a Pareto chart, right? So what do we need? So the first thing we need is we need to still have customer into the view. So one way to do that is to grab customer name and put it into detail. When we do that, what's going to happen is we're going to split each one of the marks, in this case, these little circles, by customer. So we have many, many customers, many, many marks. That's the first piece. Now, the second piece is we need to use table calculations because we want to we want to do a running total, and then we want to do a percent of total, just like we did before. So let's go ahead and do that by starting with sales. Click on sales, go into quick table calculation, and we're going to do a running total. But then we need to do the percentage of that, right? So what we can do then is we're going to go into edit table calculation, and we're going to do a secondary calculation that is going to be the percent of total. Now notice that one thing that's helpful about this little window is that as we change it, our view also changes. So I can get a preview of what the chart will look like. But there's something odd about this axis. This axis only seems to go up to 1.4%. We would expect it to go all the way to 100%, right? So what's going on? Well, remember the scope of table calculations, right? We can tell table calculations how should they be configured. And we want, in this case, to do the running total for all the customers. So one thing we can do is we can change this and make sure that we select customer. So the running total is calculated across all of our customers. And the percent of total luckily was already defaulted to that. We can still check it if we want to. But if you notice, now these axes go all the way up to 100%. So we're doing the running total and the percent of total for sales across all of our customers. This is already correct. But we're still missing, why is it still like this? Well, we still need to do the same thing with our a number of customers. We want to find out if the 20% of our customers make up the 80% of our sales. So let's do the same thing here. Go over here. We can do a little shortcut, add a table calculation. And same as we did before, we first need to do a running total. We want to do this by customer name. And then we need to do a percent of total. And we still want to do this by customer name. So the bottom also goes 100%. Both are going to 100%, which is great news. But it doesn't quite look like a Pareto chart, right? What's missing? What did we change? What was one thing we did on the other side that we didn't do on this one? We've done so many things that it's kind of hard to remember now. But if one of the first things we did on this Pareto chart was to sort it, right? Because we want to start with our larger customers first. So we haven't done that here yet. We're just seeing all the customers, in this case, in the data source order, which normally is alphabetical. So we need to change this. We can right click on customer name or click on the menu and we can sort this. And we're going to sort this not by data source order, but by a field. In this case, it's going to be sales, but it's going to be descending. So we have our larger customers first. Just like that, we already have that Pareto chart. We can, add a little bit flair to this. For example, make this look like an area chart, but the results are already here. And the cool thing about this representation is that now what we can do is say, okay, well, what's 80% of our sales is over here. And what about 20% of our customers is over here. So it looks like we're not quite on the 80-20 rule for ourselves, but it's not that far off yet either, right? We about 30% of our 80% of our sales are made by about 30% of our customers. So while we're not quite on the 80-20 rule, it's still important for us to focus on those large customers because those make up a large portion of our sales. So this Pareto chart or a full Pareto chart is what allows us to compare those two. And although it's slightly different than this bar and line combination, it still leverages those key concepts, a dual axis and and table calculations. All right. So that's about Pareto charts. Now, the next type of chart that we're going to look at today is the Sparklines, and this is one of my favorites because Sparklines are super helpful in visualizing KPIs. Normally, you have a KPI, so you have a number, a big number that you're tracking towards. But then what's helpful about that KPI is how are you trending? Are you getting closer to it, or are you just flat and will never get there? And sparklines are super helpful in helping us see that. A sparkline is nothing but a line chart with some formatting, but that formatting is key because it helps us focus on the trend. It helps us focus whether we're making strides towards the goal or not. So here below, what you can see is what a regular line chart looks like. But notice that how after some cleanup, we can make it look like the one on top so that we can see whether we're trending upwards or we're kind of staying flat and maybe in trouble. So that is what we're going to build now. We're going to build a sparkline, and we're going to, again, be using a couple of those concepts. We're going to be using a dual axis, and we're going to be using table calculations. So let's go ahead and build this. All right. The first thing we need a metric. What's our KPI, right? And in this case, that KPI may be a profit. So let's grab profit, add it into rows, and we have that here. Now, normally we want to see this over time. So we want to see trends over time. So let's grab a date this time, drop date into columns. And something really awesome about dates in Tableau here is that I can just change if year is not granular enough, maybe we want to see this by month so we can see a little bit more of a trend. Looks like in general, our profit is trending upwards, which is great. But we may want to see this by our different segments. So if we drag it into rows, we can now see 4 different line charts. And we can see that corporate is definitely looking upwards. But home office, for example, it's kind of flat, right? Not doing as well. So this is already, like I said, a line chart already helps us see that. But that's what's different, what's special about the Sparklines is that it really allows us to focus on the trend only. So what we need to do is remove any elements that are not helping us focus on that trend. So how do we do that? Well, first we need to remove some elements that are not helpful. Like, we have these reference lines on the back that we need to remove. So we can go into Format, right click into the view and Format. And one thing we're going to want to do is we want to remove any grid lines. We also don't need to see any zero lines because again, they are distracting. So we can remove zero lines. And now we only are seeing the trend line. There's also a few other things that are distracting us. For example, this order date over here and the names of the months over here. So what we can do is right click on any of these columns or fields that are unnecessary and hide the headers. So if we do this, we now can focus more and more on that line chart. Now, one thing that is special about this formatting of line charts, and you can see that here in the example, let me go back, is that the line chart the Sparkline takes about half of the visualization, and we also want to see what's the last status of the KPI. We want to see where we are right now. So we still need to do some formatting, but we also need to add this value over here. So right now, what we have is just the line chart. So the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out what that last value is. And we can see it here. It's 42,000 for consumer. It's 79,000 for corporate. But how can we, quote unquote, materialize this value? Well, we already have that value in the view. We just need to generate the last value of it. So it's already on the view. We just need to tweak it a little bit. That sounds a lot like a table calculation. And so far, we've used table calculations by going into the menu and adding a quick table calculation. But another way to do that is through a calculated field. You can actually write a table calculation. And we're going to call this table calculation last value. And for this, we're going to use a function called lookup. So lookup allows us to see within the visualization and pick a value that we want. In this case, what we want to look at is the profit, right? But what position do we want to pick? Well, we want to pick the last position. We want to know where we are today. So we can do last. And when we do that, what we're saying is, let's find the last value in each one of the lines in this case. So if we click OK, we now have this last value. We can drag it into the view. Notice it's flat, which is okay because we want to have that last value only, but we don't want to see an axis, right? We want to see the number itself. So one quick tip here, you can always change a continuous value, which generates an axis, into a discrete value, which generates a number. So we can now see that 42,000 in December is what we see here. So that we already have that value, which is great news. But if you notice, one thing that we're missing is we want to highlight that value over here as well. So how do we do that? Well, at that point, we are almost there. We are going to create one last calculated field. Let's call this is last value. And what this is going to do is going to check if this last value that we're calculating is equal to the profit that we're seeing, because that is only going to be true in this very end, at the very end of this line, right? So we have this new measure, is last value. And to get us there, if you remember here, one is a line chart, another one is like a circle. So we need two types of chart. How do we get two types of chart? We need to do two axes, right? So let's bring profit. That's great. We have a copy of profit. But then on the second profit, what we're going to do is we're going to change this to a circle. And we want to make sure that we only highlight the last value. Cool. So all we have left, do a dual axis. And if we want to, we could change this to another color, like gray. All right, so almost there. But what's still taking attention out of our eyes, out of that trend, is this axis, right? So at this point, just hide the headers, and we can make this smaller. Like remember, it's about half of what it should be. And that's it. We now have our Sparkline. And if you notice, one thing we may also want to do is change the formatting of this last value so it doesn't show us all the decimals. I'll leave that for later, just because I want to make sure that we cover these two charts. But notice that now we can see that corporate is definitely trending up, whereas home office it's not trending up, but not as much. So it's not as flat as we thought it was originally, but still not as successful as corporate is. So a Sparkline here helps us see that trend, and it's particularly helpful for those KPIs. Now, let's go into the last two charts of the day. The first one is going to be a bump chart. Bump charts are helpful for competition. If you ever have, if you're ever running some kind of contest between, I don't know, in this case, regions, but it can be different products, it can be teams, you may want to see who's top, who's going on top. And if those competitions go over time, you may want to see how those positions have changed month over month or year over year, et cetera, et cetera. That's what we're seeing here. We're seeing here uh, for each one of the regions, what the ranking was. Were they first, second, third, or fourth, right? So a bump chart helps us see positions over time in this case, and we want to build that now. So let's go into the bump chart. And the first thing we need to do is we need to have some metric that helps us measure that competition. So for this, in this case, we're going to be using profit again. So our overall profit is 1.3 million. Now we have different teams, different regions, so we can drag region into the view. There's 4 regions for it. And we want to see the change of rankings over time. So we can drag order date. And let's again focus into the months, right? So what we're seeing here are how each region is contributing to the profits month over month. Now, even if we focus on just 1 month, we really have to read into the numbers to see who won first and second and third, right? So we have to process all these numbers before we actually get to know who's winning. There has to be an easier way to do that. We just need to rank them, right? We just want to know who's on top. So again, table calculations to the rescue. Rank is one of the quick table calculations that we can use. If we select profit, notice that we can select rank. And when we click rank, we get to see the results. But if you notice, it doesn't seem like it's calculating correctly. That's because by default, this table calculation is doing it across the table from left to right. So we have 1, 2, 3, one number for each month. We want to have one number for each region. So luckily, we already know how to change that. We can tell Tableau to calculate this for every region, not across the table. So when we do that, we can see that in January, the South region was winning. But then in February, the Central region was winning. In March, the East region was winning, etc., etc. So it's now easier to know who's on top. But it's not visual enough, right? We can make this more visual. So how do we change this? Well, here's a handy tip that I didn't learn for quite a bit in Tableau. But you can select multiple fields in Tableau by pressing your Control key in your keyboard and clicking. So you can click on Profit, and then you can click on Region. But when you select a couple of fields that are in the view already, one of the options that shows up is this swap. What swap does is it moves the fields, it changes each field's position. So let's swap it. And notice that when we do that, region is now on label and profit now went to rows. So we can already see the different regions as a line chart. But this bump chart is not quite there yet because notice that one is down the bottom. And when we think about ranking, one should be on top, right? So, or the default way in how axes work is not quite working for us here. So what we can do is we can edit this axis and we can reverse it so that one is on top of 4. And after we do that, it's almost there. One thing we may want to do here, just to make it even more obvious, is add region into color. And now you can see that the South region, although it started first, it struggled the rest of the year. It didn't do quite well. On the other hand, maybe the East region started okay, but it closed really strong. So, so a bump chart is really helpful in seeing that change over time, especially ranking. So if you have any competition that you're running, this type of chart is super helpful. I've seen a lot of charts like this for sports events. So this is one way in how you can build those bump charts. And we're going to wrap us up with a trellis chart. A trellis chart is it's really a version of a small multiples, and you may think of a small multiples as a you can think of small multiples as seeing the same chart across rows and columns. In this case, we're seeing a map many times because we have many shipping containers. So we want to see a map for every one of the shipping containers that we have, like jumbo box, jumbo drum, large box, etc., etc. So if I want to build something like this, I can double click on the map, right? We can see maybe profit, if that's the measure we're thinking about, and we can break this by product container. But if we do it like this, notice that we now have a pretty long scroll bar. We can also move it to columns. And although the scroll bar is not as bad, we have a lot of information that we don't really need, like the whole map of the Americas, right? So so we can do better with how we display that information by using a trellis chart. So users don't have to see any scroll bars and see everything in one screen. So to do this, we're going to move product container to the left. And what we're going to use is, again, we're going to use a dual axis. So let's grab latitude, move it into rows, and now we have two maps, but on the second map, we don't want to see it colored by profit. We want to see it colored by the product container, the different boxes that we had, right? So notice, let's change this also to a map. So it's a field map. Notice that it feels like everything is jumbo box, but that's not really true. If you click on Jumbotron, container, etc., those are actually available in our data set and in every state. What's happening though is because we put a product container on color or detail, what's happening, oops, is that if we select Washington, there's actually 7 items. There's one for every container. We are creating sort of a book. We have layers of product containers. So that's okay, but we don't really need that right now, right? We want to split it in rows and columns. So what we're going to do to make this a trellis chart is, first off, let's combine this into a single chart. So we're going to do a dual axis, and we have everything in a map. But now we need to create these rows and columns. And we're going to do this using a table, using a couple of calculations. The first calculation is going to be called number of rows. And what it's going to do, it's going to count. So we're going to use a function called index. It's a table calculation. And we're going to divide this by the number of rows that we want. Let's say 3. Now, if we divide a number by 3, it can be a decimal, but rows is we want it to be a whole number. So we're going to round it. We're going to round it to no decimals. So this will return a whole number which represents the number of the row. So that's number of rows. We're going to duplicate this one. And this one, on the other hand, is going to be number of columns. It's going to be similar, except that instead of using this division, we're going to use a module function. And when we do that, we're going to have 2 different fields. One change we're going to do, remember how we changed something, a measure that was generated an axis, to a number we're using changing it to discrete? We're going to do that here too. And the reason why we're going to do that here is because now if we move this to rows and columns, notice that we are now generating, we're now breaking the viz based on these numbers instead of generating an axis. But this is not a trellis chart yet, right? So how do we make this a trellis chart? Well, we're almost there. Remember, this is a table calculation, and with table calculations, we can specify how they calculate. So we can change this so that it's calculated across containers and provinces, but we generate a different row for every container. And we can do the same thing here. We can edit this table calculation, make sure that it runs across product containers and provinces, but it restarts on every product container. And now we already have sort of that trellis chart, except that we can move this like this so that it looks much closer to our original trellis chart. You may want to do some more formatting, like showing the headers or hiding the headers, I'm sorry. But this is about that trellis chart that we had originally. And what's cool about this is that you can see everything in one screen. No need to scroll towards the right or towards the bottom. It's all already available for you. So super helpful when you have to see something split across multiple dimensions. And that's about the last chart that we want to share, that we have time to share with you today. However, if you are interested about any of these concepts and if you want to extend more what you can do with Show Me, I have a couple of recommendations for you. First one, it's a Tableau conference, TC19, so last year conference presentation from a couple of Zen masters. And they are fantastic. They have some of the best visualizations that I've seen out there. They have their own blog, but they're in Tableau Public, and they tell you how you can extend Show Me by using different functions like we did today. If you prefer to read as opposed to watch a video, if you learn more that way, they also have a couple of blog posts that talk about it. But if you like what you saw today and you are, especially if you're into math and trigonometry, highly suggest to watch this video and read these two articles. They are super helpful and will let you do anything you want with Show Me. Any type of chart you want to build in Tableau, you can. You just need to know the techniques and sometimes the formulas that take to do that. But with that, I wanted to again thank so much everyone for joining today. We really hope this was helpful, and we'll hang out a few more minutes just catching up with any questions that we may have still in the chat. But otherwise, thanks again for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you next time on our Tableau Tuesday. That's it for now. Take care.
Great, Santi. That was excellent. One question that we did have is your version of the workbook available to be shared?
I can post it. I can post it, Steve. Maybe I can post it on public, and then we can reference that on once we post it on YouTube, the video on YouTube.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, why don't you post that up onto Tableau Public, and then when I post everybody, this recording is going to be on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/c, as in channel, /Tableau Tuesday, and I will just link to the Tableau Public in the comments of the video. That'd be perfect. Other than that, I think we have all the questions answered.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'll stop recording. And
anybody who provided their email, we will definitely have your account team reach out to you to help you with the questions that we try to answer for you during this.